controversy. So I did. And I loved the book, and everything was fine until the last chapter. Then it didn't go so well. And you'll find this, you have some sermon notes there. Okay, all the Bible texts are on the sermon notes. This helps it go faster. And so I want you to look at this page 673. In this same paragraph, the author describes the actual suffering in hell. For some people, it's just a moment, but for other people in the lake of fire, it lasts for days. And finally, I came across this statement that just knocked me over. Talking about the suffering of Satan. His punishment is to be far greater than that of those whom he has deceived. Now listen to this. After all have perished who fell by his deception, he is still to live and suffer on. Now I'm in trouble. Now I'm grateful that God doesn't burn people in hell for eternity, but I just found out that human beings burn for 3 days, and Satan burns longer than that. I don't think I'm too excited about this after all. What have I bought into? Maybe my dad was right. Maybe the rejection of religion is the right thing to do. Because if this God in heaven burns people in hell for 3 days, I mean, have you ever been burned before? Pretty bad, isn't it? Now, try to imagine the worst person, the serial killers, child molesters, whatever it is. And you really want to punish them. Would you like to be able to take just a blowtorch and just do it to the back of their hand? Would you like to do that? Wouldn't you just like to do that? And how long would you like to do that for? You couldn't do it. You could not do that for 5 seconds. But now I just read in this book that God does this for 3 days. Close the book, set it down, done with that. I'm going to go back to the Bible. I'm going to find out if this author is right in what she said. I need to see if what she said is represented in the Bible. Will you want to do that with me today? Well, first of all, we got to ask ourselves about God. What's the purpose for this whole lake of fire, hellfire thing in the first place? Well, you notice Psalm 85, verse 10. We got to ask ourselves simple questions. What two things are true about God? And as you go through the entire Bible, you look at the plan of salvation, the cross and everything. Notice there, Psalm 85, verse 10 says, mercy and truth have met together. Righteousness and peace have kissed. What two things are true about God? Now, if you have a pen or pencil, you can write this one down. But God is both just and merciful. God is both just and merciful. Now, I always want to be able to have some background music when I sing, when I preach, and I like that. That's kind of nice. But God is both just and merciful. God wants to extend mercy. But there's another group over here demanding justice. And so God has a problem. He has people who want and demand, and rightly so demand justice. And yet he wants to extend mercy. 2 Thessalonians chapter 1, verse 9 and 10, and these shall be punished with everlasting destruction from the presence of the Lord and from the glory of his power when he comes in that day to be glorified in his saints and to be admired among those who believe, because our testimony among you was believed. There's two groups. Those who receive the just reward and those who live by grace. There's two different groups here. God is both just and merciful. Now, I remember one day I was all excited about this faith, and I was learning about it, and I wanted to fulfill one of my goals in life. I was 20 years old, and I wanted to be a ski bum. You know what a ski bum is? It's somebody who gets a menial job, lives in a tiny little apartment, but skis all day. And that's what I wanted to do. Now, I grew up in San Diego, but I have no interest in moving back. The farther north I can go, the better, because I want to water ski all summer, and I want to snow ski all winter. And I told your previous pastor, I met him in an airport in Los Angeles, and we got to meet, and I found out he pastored up here in the Rutland area. I said, get me a call to Kelowna. I want to live next to that lake. And so the conference sends me to Vancouver. I love that. Well, I wanted to be a ski bum, and I fulfilled I got one winter of being a ski bum. I worked in a casino in the nights, and I skied in the daytime. One day I met a guy that worked in the casino, and he cut hair. And so I said, can you cut my hair? He said, sure. So I was getting a haircut. But I was also excited about this book called Steps of Christ that I was reading. And I was sharing it and talking about it. And I could see he was getting frustrated. And I tell you, when you start sharing your faith with somebody that's cutting your hair, and they got sharp scissors in their hands, it's a brave thing. So I was telling him about this, and he stopped me. And he said to me, he says, long ago, I made a deal with God. I don't bother him. He doesn't bother me. All I want is what I deserve. Yeah, you figured that out, didn't you? I told him, I said, you know what? That bargain is true. You will get what you deserve. But I don't want what I deserve. So you can write this one down if you want. If we reject God's mercy, we demand his justice. Doesn't that make sense? This guy cutting my hair, he rejected God's mercy and he was demanding God's justice. And he'll get it someday. See, if we reject God's mercy, we demand his justice. And the next one, and you could write this one down, correlates with it. The wicked demand what they deserve. When we have the lake of fire, when God has the lake of fire, it is not something that he is pushing on anyone. People are receiving what they demanded. They demanded justice, and they're receiving justice. But I have a problem with this fire now. I understand the justice. I understand destroying somebody. But again, burning for 3 days is not making a lot of sense to me. Yeah, I know it's a whole lot better than eternity, but still 3 days, that's just not making much sense. So, what is true about fire? Revelation 20, verse 9. They went up on the breadth of the earth and surrounded the camp of the saints and the beloved city, and fire came down from God out of heaven, and what did it do? It devoured them. Now let me tell you, ask you children, I'm going to just ask the children right now, if you want to preserve food in your house, if you buy some food and you want to preserve it, how do you preserve food in your house? Can you children think about that? Little brave ones? Okay, I'll tell you what you might try. What do? You open up, what do you have in your house? Refrigerator, right? That's a great way of doing it. How about, has your parents ever canned any food? We can applesauce every year. I love it. Much better than store-bought stuff. You can can it. You can salt preserve. You ever have salt preserved olives? You don't have Armenian friends then, apparently. Okay. Salt preserved olives are really neat. You can preserve things with salt. You can dry things. But one thing you never do to preserve something is you don't throw it in the fire. Why is that? Because fire, you could write this one down, fire never preserves, it always consumes. Fire never preserves, always consumes. Now, I appreciate the background sound again. I appreciate that, but I won't be needing it. So, we know that fire consumes, and it never preserves. So, it's not making sense. If a fire comes down and it burns people for 3 days, this is not making sense to me. But then I went back to that paragraph, that sentence that bothered me so much. Go back to the top of the page again. Notice what it says there. The second sentence. After all have perished who fell by his deceptions, he is still to live and suffer on. It doesn't say burn on. It says suffer on. That's not burning. That's suffering. So now we got to ask the question, what is the Bible's concept of suffering? And if Jesus suffered on the cross what we would have suffered in that lake of fire, then maybe what Jesus suffered on the cross is the answer. So let's take a look at that. Number 3, how did Jesus suffer? Well, Luke 24, verse 46. Then he said to them, thus it is written, and thus was necessary for the Christ to suffer and to rise from the dead the 3rd day. So the Bible says it was necessary for Jesus to suffer. It wasn't just necessary for Christ to die upon the cross. It was necessary for him to suffer. And you read this in Psalm 69, verse 20 and 21. Reproach hath broken my heart, and I am full of heaviness. And I looked for some to take pity, but there was none. And comfort for comforters, but I found none. They gave me also gall for my meat, and in my thirst they gave me vinegar to drink. So how did Jesus suffer on the cross? Separation. Pardon me? Yeah, but how did he suffer? What kind of suffering did he go through? Separation, yeah? Take a look at this. Remember that the book I started with was Great Controversy, and that's one that got me in trouble? Now look at this statement from Desire of Ages. Now if I had started in Desire of Ages, I may have been better off. Take a look at this one. But now, with terrible weight of guilt he bears. He cannot see the Father's reconciling face. The withdrawal of the divine countenance from the Savior in this hour of supreme anguish pierced his heart with a sorrow that can never be fully understood by man. So great was this agony that his physical pain was hardly felt. The suffering on the cross. Now, you've heard sermons about suffering on the cross. In fact, I remember there was a film that came out years ago. I think it was in the 1980s, maybe in the early 90s. What was the Mel Gibson movie? The Passion of the Christ, right? We know Mel Gibson's passion. That's bloodshed and all that kind of stuff. And that's what he showed there. I was just sitting in a pastor's meeting, so all the pastors there in Kalispell. It wasn't the 1990s; it was actually this century. But and they asked everybody. They asked the pastors. They said, who here has seen the Passion of the Christ?" And of course, every pastor raised their hand except for me. And then they all turned around and they stared at me like, "Oh well, it's the Adventist, always weird one." You know, and nobody asked me why I didn't watch it, but there was a simple reason why I didn't watch it, because I knew what Mel Gibson was going to do. He was going to focus upon the physical. But the Bible does not describe the physical very much. It says that he was flogged. It says that the nails were placed in his hands. But beyond that, it never describes the physical. It spends a fair amount of time describing the emotional. What was going on? Well, in the garden. He's not being, in the Garden of Gethsemane, he is not being whipped, he's not being tortured, and yet he's sweating like drops of blood. There on the cross, who has abandoned him? All of his disciples except for John and a few of the women. He is now being cursed by people he's trying to save. The religious establishment has rejected him. And now he's being taunted. He saved others, but he can't save himself. And now the Father, now that Jesus, who's now taken the weight of my sin upon him, which would be enough to crush anyone, add to it the world's sin, onto an innocent Lamb of God. And then the Father, because Jesus had become sin for us, turns his back upon his Son in a very painful self thing there. So great was this agony that his physical pain was hardly felt. The cross is emotional suffering. That's what it is. The physical pain is there, but that was not the focus. Take a look at 2 Peter chapter 2, verse 6. And turning the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah into ashes, condemned them to destruction, making them an example to those who afterward would live ungodly, and delivered righteous Lot. Now this is going to blow you away. I don't know if you've read this before. I'm sure you read this before, but listen to it again. It just blows me away when I think about it. Who was oppressed, and this is Lot, who was oppressed by the filthy conduct of the wicked. For that righteous man, dwelling among them, tormented his righteous soul from day to day by seeing and hearing their lawless deeds. Do you have that picture of Lot living in Sodom and Gomorrah? Tormented day by day by witnessing all that sin? Let me ask you this simple question. When you watch sin on TV, are you tormented by it? Ask yourself that question. That might give you an answer about your condition. You see, you want to write this one down. It's important. The righteous suffer when God is absent. The righteous suffer when God is absent. My God, why have you forsaken me? The question is now, I got to hurry this up because I'm looking at the time right there. How do the wicked suffer? What do they go through? We'll take a look here in Hebrews chapter 10, verse 26 and 27. For if we sin willfully after we have received the knowledge of the truth, there no longer remains a sacrifice for sins, but a certain fearful expectation of judgment and fiery indignation which will devour the adversaries. It is a fearful thing to fall into the hands of the living God. Notice what it says there, a fearful expectation of judgment. Now, I don't know if you grew up in the same home I did, but I suspect you did. I grew up, and my mother was a full-time homekeeper, and she's a great mom, beautiful woman, but God bless her, she had 4 boys. The oldest one was the perfect oldest child. The second one was trouble at birth, she told me. And I was, whatever Ron does, I do. So if we're in trouble, we are in trouble together. And the fourth one was the baby. So Ron and I would get in trouble on a regular basis, and my mother, in a fit of frustration with us, would utter those words that would send chills down our spines. You know what those words are? Wait till your father gets home. All the fun is gone now. Now, my father administered good old-fashioned German discipline in our home. He would send us out to the woodpile, and we had to pick our own switch by which he was going to administer that German discipline. No offense to those of you who are German, but anyways, I grew up with a German father. One day I finally got smart And I did a little physics calculations, and I brought in the heaviest log I could carry as a boy. My dad fell over laughing. He thought that was so funny, and I managed to get out of it that day. You can write this one down. The wicked suffer when God is present. The righteous suffer when God is absent. The wicked suffer when God is present. Satan, how does he suffer? Limited alone on the earth. He will not have the privilege of ranging to the other planets to tempt and annoy those who have not fallen. During this time, Satan suffers extremely. He cannot live in his wickedness. He suffers. So finally, I got to ask myself the question, do the wicked suffer physically? I've been going here trying to get across the point that the cross was about separation from God and the horrible experience that is. And that we suffer here on this earth when we are in the presence of wickedness, if our hearts are knit with God. But do the wicked suffer physically? Well, take a look at Matthew chapter 8, verse 12. This one's often quoted to show that the wicked suffer physically. Look at this one. But the sons of the kingdom will be cast out into the outer darkness. And notice here the sentence, there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. There it is. Physical suffering. But again, we can allow the Bible to interpret itself. James 5, verse 1. Come now, you rich, weep and howl for your miseries that are coming upon you. How are they suffering? They're suffering from anticipation. They're suffering anxiety. They're thinking about the judgment coming. They're thinking about the judgment that they have demanded, and they are now weeping and howling. We'll take a look at Psalm 112, verse 10. The wicked will see it and be grieved. Well, he's not experiencing it, he's just seeing it. He will gnash his teeth and melt away. The desire of the wicked shall perish. You can write this one down. You can write anything you want you think is appropriate, but I would write down the wicked suffer emotionally, or the wicked suffer anxiety. You can put what you want down there. 1 John 4:18, there is no fear in love, but perfect love casts out fear, because fear involves torment. But he who fears has not been made perfect in love. So, we know that the wicked suffer, but the Bible teaches that they suffer anxiety and fear. They suffer emotionally. They suffer from the very things that they demanded from God. They suffer from the justice that they demanded. Number 7. When do the righteous suffer? Hebrews chapter 12, verse 3-6. For consider him who endured such hostility from sinners against himself, lest you become weary and discouraged in your souls. You have not yet resisted bloodshed, striving against sin, and you have forgotten the exhortation which speaks to you as to sons. My son, do not despise the chastening of the Lord, nor be discouraged when you are rebuked by him. For whom the Lord loves, he chastens and scourges every son whom he receives. Now, I just want to lighten the mood up for a little bit. You know, I'm talking about suffering and all that kind of stuff. I just want to lighten the mood a little bit just to explain this verse here. Now, you all have the same problem we had in Montana. That is, you have this pine bark beetle problem, right? It's destroying the pine trees. Now, the pine trees are a source of food for grizzly bears. They like to eat pine nuts. They don't make pesto or anything like that, but they like the pine nuts. And we're losing these trees and losing the pine trees, and thus the bears have to go look for food. And like any human being, they are looking for fast food. And so they wander down into the neighborhoods, and there in Montana, there's an abundant source of food available outside. There might be your apple orchard or whatever it is, but also there, we throw our table scraps out onto the garden. We don't put it in the garbage because they'll just compost and become part of the garden. Not only that, but in Montana, most dogs don't come indoors because things are dirty outside and they don't want them to come inside. So the dogs stay outside, and thus the dog food stays outside, and the bear likes to eat the dog food. And if the dog is tied up, well, you can figure that one out too. So we have a problem with bears there in Montana, and so what happens is you call the rangers, and the rangers come and they spank the bear. Now, do you want to know how to spank a grizzly bear? There's a proper way of spanking a grizzly bear, and I have checked with an animal control person here in Canada, in British Columbia, and he says what I say is how they practice it here in British Columbia too. So this is the standard procedure for spanking a grizzly bear. Okay? First thing they do is they put it in one of those bear traps in there, and they put the food in there and the smelly stuff the bears like. Bear goes inside, the trap door falls off, they take the bear away, 100 kilometers, whatever, drop the bear off in a place so hopefully he's got some healthy pine trees and other things the bears like to eat, and hope the bear doesn't come back. But the problem is sometimes those bears have an amazing memory, and they will wander back to that peach orchard or whatever it was they enjoyed eating so much. Little dogs. And if the bear comes back, then they have to do what we call a hard spank. And the hard spank is this. They trap the bear just like they did before, but this time they release the bear right where they trapped the bear. And this is how they do it. The rangers are in the back of the pickup truck, and they open up the gate. The bear comes out, and then the rangers have shotguns with bean bags inside. And they aim those bean bags at the south end of the bear. Do you know which is the south end of the bear? Yeah, you can figure out which end they're aiming at, all right? They're aiming at the south end of the bear behind, okay? And boom, 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 boom. Bean bags, boom, 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 boom. Now, the reason they're using bean bags is because at close range, you don't want to break the skin and cause the bear to bleed. These cause that bear to sting terribly, but it doesn't break it. And the bear doesn't like that at all, takes running off. They put down those shotguns. They pick up the rifles. They've got rubber bullets in there now. Boom, 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 boom. Now that bear's really running like crazy. Now they put down the rubber bullet rifles, and they pick up the third gun. And I know you Americans love guns. But anyways, and so they pick up the third gun, and it's got cracker shells in it. They're kind of like bottle rockets. And they shoot off in the air, and they explode at a certain predetermined distance. And now that bear is about that distance. Boom, 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 boom. It's like Canada Day all over the place. Boom, 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 all around the bear. And the bear is not liking that at all, and he's just running like crazy. And they put those guns down, they hop out of the truck, and in the front of the truck are these bloodhounds trained to go after grizzly bears. They've got them on leashes. They don't want to let them go, and they've got electric bullhorns. And now they're running after the bear, and the bloodhound's going and running after the bear. And now the rangers are talking in their bullhorns, and they're saying things that are very offensive to bears. You know, bad bear. You know, your mother was a sow. Stuff like that, you know. They're saying things that the bear doesn't want to hear, and they're going after the bear, and the bear is just running like crazy. Now, let me ask you this question. In the process of all this, is the bear saying to himself, my, those rangers love me? No, no. The bear is thinking, man, these rangers are abusive. Now, let me ask you this. While those rangers are abusing the bear, do they hate the bear? No, they didn't become rangers because they hate bears. They love bears. So why are they abusing this bear? Because if the bear comes back a third time, they'll have to put the bear down. They'll have to kill the bear. It's become habituated to human food, and he's not going to change. You see, we as God's people, we need to make a decision. We're either going to suffer now or suffer later. We're either going to suffer what it's like to live a righteous life in a wicked world. We're even going to suffer as God, as a loving Father, works with us and develops us and disciplines us. I remember when I was a kid, there was an advertisement for an oil filter company. It was Fram oil filters. I thought maybe it was another one, but I was wrong. There's a oil filter I like a lot called Perlator. You ever use an oil filter, Perlator? Yeah, it's kind of a red, white, and blue sign and stuff like that. I moved up here to Canada, and I thought, well, I went to Walmart to pick up my Perlator oil filter, and they didn't have it there. I thought, well, wow, I guess Perlator oil filters are not up here in Canada. But then I saw there was a truck going by that said Perlator, and it's red, white, and blue on it. I thought, whoa, they use so many filters, they deliver them to the door. And I never got them to do it for me yet, so. But there was this commercial there, and this mechanic is rebuilding an engine because the guy did not take care of his engine, did not change the oil regularly. And now he was going to, instead of having an inexpensive oil filter change on a regular basis, he now had to rebuild the engine. And the mechanic said a really simple thing. He said, pay me now or pay me later. You want to write that one down if you want. Pay me now or pay me later. We either suffer from living a righteous life in a wicked world. We either suffer now or we suffer later when it's very clear that we demanded God's justice and rejected his mercy. So finally, what is this lake of fire and what's it all about? I'm going to try to describe it to you like this. In Matthew chapter 10, verse 28, do not fear those who kill the body but cannot kill the soul, but rather fear him who is able to destroy both body and soul in hell. The purpose of the lake of fire is to destroy. It's not to cause suffering. Do you catch that? The purpose of the lake of fire, according to the Bible, is to destroy. It's not there for suffering. So let's just give you a picture. When do the wicked suffer? They suffer when God is present. Three people heard the sermon today. Good. The wicked suffer when God is present. So we have this picture here. The city of God, the New Jerusalem, is now here on this earth. The wicked are raised from the dead. Satan has now gathered them together into an army. They are marching up to the city to take the city. Those who are without are, in this case, greater than those who are within. And yet God shows himself and then shows them their sin and the loss, the great loss that they are now suffering because of that. And each individual, in a rare moment in their lives, they clearly see the actions of their lives. And the weight of their suffering becomes unbearable. Some suffer for but a moment. Others suffer for longer. I don't know how God is going to do it, but some way, somehow, whether individually or what, but when God, in his wisdom, feels that they have fully suffered for their sins, I'm talking about recognizing what they have done and the emotional, horrible experience of recognizing that. When that happens, the fire comes down and destroys them. So here's the final sentence. You want to write this one down? And you can help me with this, okay? The lake of fire does not cause the suffering. It ends the suffering. Thank you very much. The lake of fire does not cause the suffering. It ends the suffering. The fire that comes down from heaven is not it's not sourced from an angry God. It comes from a very merciful God who wishes that none should perish but all come to eternal life. I started reading the Book of Great Controversy again, and I finished it up, and I enjoyed it. You know, there's a song I want us to conclude with. And again, you can tell I like to introduce new songs to people. This one is not a new song. It used to be in Christ Our Song. I don't know why they didn't include it in the hymnal. It's called The Love of God, and it's a really powerful song. But I want you to listen to the third stanza. I'm going to read it to you because you may not catch it while you're singing it, but to me it's probably the greatest poetry I've ever seen in a song. Could we with ink the ocean fill, and were the skies of parchment made, were every stalk on earth a quill, and every man a scribe by trade, to write the love of God above would drain the ocean dry. Nor could the scroll contain the whole, though stretched from sky to sky. We have a very loving God.